everyone, welcome back, and today I'm going to presenting to you about the water cycle. We often don't think about the weather because it happens commonly. Whether it rains or it stays a sunny day, this all has to do with water, which contributes to the overall cycle of it. Let's move on to one of the first steps in the water cycle, which is evaporation. Evaporation is basically when the liquid turns into a gas molecule. After a very long rainy day, you will often notice that the concrete or the sidewalks of your neighborhood are soaked and they are very dark. But after a couple of hours with the sun out, all that water disappears. Or does it? Actually, the water is going into the air because of the sun. The sun acts like a heat source. And whenever liquid gets heated up, it becomes very energized and moving. This eventually leads it to go up and rise into the air. So this is basically the same example as when you boil a pot of water. If you boil it for too long, you will notice that you have less water than what you started with because all that heat is extracting the water molecules from the pot and turns it into a more spacey gas. Evaporation can happen anywhere, even on drenched clothes in the big worldwide vast ocean. The next thing I'm going to talk about is condensation. Even when you can't see it, things are happening in the clouds. This is because when all the water molecules rise up into the sky, into the clouds, when it is gas molecules, it becomes condensed, leading it to turn into more of like a liquid molecule. In this stage, first evaporation and now the condensation forms the clouds. In this diagram, you can see that as the water vapor forms into little groups, it becomes bigger and bigger until it is a cloud droplet. A lot of these cloud droplets will eventually form one big puffy cloud, which there is many clouds. And as you can see, as water is evaporating, it will eventually turn into this. This is the same idea as when you see little dew drops on your grass or your window. Little dewdrops on the grass is because the temperature changes from the night before and into the morning when it is more chillier. So all that humidity from the day before will have those little water molecules floating around. But as the morning is chillier, all those water molecules will condense into bigger balls, which will eventually cause them to become water droplets on the grass. This is the same as when your window is kind of foggy because inside it is more heated than the temperature outside, and naturally water becomes attracted to the heat. So when the water vapor sees the heat, it starts to melt, and as you can see, this turns into a liquid. Let's talk about precipitation. Precipitation is one of the final processes of the water cycle. These come in many different forms, from hail, sleet, rain, to snow. These are all the types of weather conditions that you can experience on your Earth. How the clouds release the water is because of the Earth's gravitational pull. When the clouds become too heavy and the water can't hold it anymore, this allows it to release and become piling onto the ground. When it goes onto the ground, it can flow almost everywhere on the planet. But what rains down depends on how cold is the atmosphere. If it's very cold, this results in more condensed objects that hit the ground like hail or snow, while also how far the water molecules fall, because if it is a farther distance, this may mean that those cold particles may eventually melt and not have enough time before they can fully touch the ground. About 121,000 cubic miles of precipitation rain down on Earth every year, and this is a lot. Let's talk about runoff. After precipitation happens, or when the clouds release all that water, then a lot of this water will end up somewhere because the earth is not because the earth cannot absorb all this water and the sun is not enough to quickly absorb that water. So where does it go? Runoff is the solution. This is the flow of water which does not get absorbed into the ground. When the soil is completely saturated, which means that it can no longer hold any more water because it is soaked, then it will flow along, eventually finding a little stream which leads into a river and eventually leading into the big ocean where the process can go again. But runoff is not always good because if there's too much precipitation, this can cause in floods, which it is very bad for the human and also the environment, which will get majorly affected. And as you can see, this is an example of runoff where there's a lot of water pooling on the surface of the plants. Let's talk about the human impact on the water cycle. Believe it or not, we have made major changes into the water cycle and preventing it from going naturally. For example, when water is no longer absorbed into the ground, it can go into different sources of water, which can affect the elements inside. For example, if your mom and dad or even farmers spray pest control or weed control into the ground, this can eventually lead up into different bodies of water, which can be toxic to the animals in the environment there. There's also this thing called acid rain. Acid rain not only damages the plants, but also limestone statues. This washes away nutrients in the ground, further preventing the trees or plants from getting the things they need. So that's why this entire forest was wiped out by acid rain and leaving the trees bare with unhealthy nutrients. Meanwhile, it can eat away weaker stone like a limestone statue, which means that things from the past which were made from limestone can get eaten away and become unfamiliar because the acid is easily responded to this kind of stone. In conclusion, I think the water cycle is very important to our everyday lives. This is one of the main sources that people around the world get the water sources. Because the water that comes down is mostly pure, we rely on this. There is 4 different kinds of cycles, including evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and eventually collection, where all this water goes into. But it is a very common thing where a lot of different elements in the ground can happen, such as the levels of saturation. Thank you for listening. I hope you like and subscribe to my channel.